The Holcim Foundation Awards is proud to partner with the Urbanist on Monocle Radio. The Holcim Foundation Awards is the world's premier competition for sustainable design, highlighting projects that contribute to the transformation of the building sector. Awarding $1 million in prizes, it honours excellence in sustainable design and construction. By showcasing innovative, soon-to-be-realised projects, the awards drive change and inspire a new generation to adopt responsible design practices. To mark the opening of free entry for the 2025 edition, the Urbanist team, led by Andrew Tuck, will bring you a very special episode of the show, where Andrew sits down with the innovators and inspirational leaders behind landmark projects in sustainable architecture and design. To find out how the Holcim Foundation supports such benchmarks of excellence in sustainable development, and to learn more about the Holcim Foundation Awards, head to holcimfoundation.org now. The Holcim Foundation Awards, proud partner of The Urbanist on Monocle Radio.
Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up,
the act of building tall has become more sophisticated, and part of that new constituency or stakeholders are the urban component.
we stopped by this year's edition of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats International Conference, which returns to London after 11 years and stops by Paris while it's in this part of the world too. With the question of constructing new versus renewing old buildings, as well as the standing theme of how to do density right, both high on the agenda, we spoke with keynote speakers and experts across the industry on what they see as the brightest way forward for our cities. That's coming up over the next 30 minutes here on The Urbanist, and now I'll hand over to Monocle's David Stevens, who sent us the full report.
Building industry loves tall building. So the question is not to convince them to do more. The question is, how can we manage those tall buildings? Are they really positive for city life or not? Can we refurbish them? So what's happening now is perhaps to change a little bit, not considering only tall building and the expression of a successful city, but also in capacity to offer urban renewal, to being retrofit, and to offer high density where you have less ground, because I think one of our targets now is to protect the ground, and also to give more efficiency to all public services, and we need density to give efficiency to public services, and tall building can be a help. It's a part of the solution. It's not the unique one.
How do we tackle the challenge of density? That's Dominique Alba, architect and CEO of Atelier Jean Nouvel, and one of the speakers at the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, or CTBUH International Conference, this year taking place in both London and Paris. I head along to the London leg at the Barbican Centre, where industry leaders and enthusiasts have gathered to talk about the challenges and opportunities that density and building tall present to our cities. This edition of the conference is subtitled New or Renew. So why is that?
Each time we act is new, but it's also renew. We always act on something already existing. And so if we don't consider that, we lose a part of the capacities of reinventing things. So new is really interesting when it's renew. That's why I like the thematic of that.
Maybe jumping to Paris now, a city which maybe isn't known as really high-rise, but interestingly the third most office space square meterage in Europe, as we saw on screen during the opening plenary. So what do you think about that impression of Paris? How does it kind of weigh up its reputation while also trying to densify?
Paris is a very unique city, like others are very unique. But what happened in Paris happened in 19th century, as you know, in 1860, when they decided to protect Paris with a limit that it's already the limit of Paris today. So it increased a lot, but in this territory, with what we knew how to do at this period. This period was before the elevators, and the elevators were born in New York. And after the war, they decided to destroy Paris and to have also high building in Paris. But it was decided at the end to protect Paris and to have the high building in La Défense. In fact, the high building is more concerned by the shape of things than by the density, because Paris is the most dense city of all the cities you've seen today. And even for offices, as you discovered, it's more than 22 million square meters for offices inside Paris. So it's a lot more than even the mile of London.
What do you think Paris could teach London, and maybe also what do you think London could in turn teach Paris? Are there some lessons that the two cities could share?
Many things, and mostly if you take advantage of looking to Great London. Great London and Great Paris, it's approximately the same size and the same density. It's made of neighborhoods. All of them have the right to decide what they want and what they don't want. But now we have to try to have a sort of a common regulation on the scale of Great Paris. And this is very interesting. In London, the people love to live in a house and they go and work in very high density offices. In Paris, it's all middle. But we have also a lot of houses. So I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen on that similar scale, because this is new. This is because of the new metro and the Great Paris. So it starts now. Perhaps in 10 years or 20 years we will see. I was involved for 10 years in the jury of New London Awards, and it was very nice to see how the architecture changed. It was very, very international and uniform architecture at the beginning, and as soon as it goes on with the years, it took some slight differences because of refurbishing, because of efficiency, because of sustainability, and it gave to the architecture of London less uniform and more identity. And I think this is good. In Paris, it's always identity. It's nothing about uniform. We have rules everywhere, but each building is slightly different. Each time it's a different building, and it gives a landmark. And this is unique, and cities need landmark.
Speaking of Paris, the two-track thinking of this year's international conference extends beyond the new or renew debate. This event is also taking place in two places, both London and Paris.
I'm Javier Quintana. I'm CEO of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. I've been in the organization for over 15 years, first as a volunteer, first in Spain, then in the UK. I belong to many of their technical committees. I'm a practicing architect myself. And then I became the chair of the chapter here in the United Kingdom. Finally, I was invited, to be the CEO of the organization, and I'm currently based in Chicago.
I found a quiet space to speak to the CTBUH CEO to explain why they chose two bases for this edition of the event.
Last year we were first in Singapore and then we went to Kuala Lumpur. It's also to see two different answers to the same question. Last year it was about the human component. How do we humanize density? And the approach in Singapore is very unique. Then we went to Kuala Lumpur with the same question. The answers are different because the challenges are different, because the administration is different, because the developers think differently, and also the users have a different understanding of what a tall building should be. In this case, London is really the center, the reference at this point in terms of reduction of carbon. And Paris is having this crucial moment that after having been very active in the tall building context with La Défense, but then other clusters of tall building, there's a new administration that has banned buildings that are beyond 35 meters in central Paris, no? So this new or renew have this other political implication. And, well, that brings a complete different context, very interesting one. So we're comparing, let's say, not that politics are not relevant here in London, but in the City of London, I think it's a more professional approach. We cannot go on like this. Professionals are saying, listen, we have the knowledge how to go about the carbon reduction, so let's start, no? In Paris, they say, well, the new or renew, the answer is simply you don't build any more tall buildings. However, at the end, what they're doing, they're pushing them outside. So it's a different take of we don't want buildings in our center because we are dense enough there. I mean, London is a city with a very, very low density. Even we have quite a few tall buildings. But Paris is one of the European capitals with higher density in the central district, in the historic district. So I can understand that this conversation that if we are already dense, we don't need, towers to become more dense. So that's why we chose to go to both cities.
Now, CTBUH, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the urban habitats part is very important to have in there. You could just be the Council on Tall Buildings. We talk a lot about tall buildings at these conferences, but why is the urban habitat part really important to keep as part of the conversation?
I think 50 years ago, to build a tall building was very much about the building itself. It was about the engineering, the architect, the decision, the user, the client, but it was a contained exercise within the building limits. Architecture has evolved a lot in this past 15 years, and now the success of a building is not only about the efficiency of the building, but how that building, tall buildings in this case, connect with the city, how the city accepts that, how citizens enjoy the building, how the public starts, to intersect with the private. More and more developers are asked to give away part of their right to build. And I think the City of London, all developers are now requested to create public spaces within the tall buildings. And with that, we're creating kind of a vertical village. And I personally think that that's one of the new dimensions that have been in the council forever, but it just grows stronger. I don't know if you're aware of this. We are considering even the renaming of the organization from Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat to Council on Vertical Urbanism. So emphasizing that part. What we're trying to put now is these tall buildings in context. That the conversation is not just about the people that have done those buildings. They will be always part of our organization. They are, in fact, the center of gravity. But now the act of building tall has become more sophisticated, and part of that new constituency or stakeholders are the urban component. This organization, it's a bit like the Formula One of the construction industry, where you get the best teams with the best engineers, with the best architects, doing the most fascinating buildings, who builds taller. I mean, it's remarkable what they're doing. Their super talls are more than 600 meters. But my perception was that while that conversation is very important, there's also something that is as important as that is from taller to better. And better at this point implies sustainability, implies dialogue, implies intersection with the rest of the world, in this case cities.
We saw in the opening address the top 10 tallest buildings, and it's impossible not to notice how many are in the Asian continent. Why do you think, it can't just be that so much of the world's population is there. Why do you think countries in Asia, Singapore, which we're hearing about today, why do you think they're so good at building tall? What is it?
When I started my speech this morning, I said that when I come from Asia to London, London feels empty. And I know that that is not true, because London is packed, no? But it's just always relative. The pace of density growth in cities like Bangkok or Jakarta is incredible. So the answer there, we don't have the time to plan. We don't have the time to set policies that will be implemented in 5 years or 10 years. We're in London, that's the typical approach would be the UK, that build consensus. Remember what has happened with high-speed train, everybody agrees that wants to have a high-speed train, but takes forever to get there. That situation is not available. So the easiest solution is to start building tall. And our concern is that because of that pace of growth, people are just building tall all over the place without a plan. There's not a central brain in these cities trying to manage all that. Now, you were asking me why so many there and not so many here. It's just a question of numbers and the acceptance. Call it is an emergency solution.
Staying for now in Asia, one of the most interesting case studies being unpacked at this event is that of Singapore, which has a vast number of unique challenges when it comes to urban growth.
I think there are two key challenges. First, I think the aging population, By 2030, 1 in every 4 Singaporeans will be over the age of 65, right? So it means, we will have to find different ways to move around in a more, comfortable way. And I guess this is where the work of our urban designers and our planners will come in to make the city more pedestrian-friendly and accessible, to everyone. The other challenge is, of course, land scarcity. We have limited land. We can only reclaim so much. And thus, the idea of how do we intensify or rather densify the city is something that we have to design for. Through the work of our urban design, our master planning, we will have to design the design strategies to deal with all these challenges. How to develop in a dense way, how to create the density yet have a quality, attractive environment. Not just designing and shape the buildings, but design the spaces between the buildings to ensure people will move around the city in a more pleasant way.
That's Lei B. Yap, the Group Director of Architecture and Urban Design with the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore. I picked her brain to find out more about what the city-state did right.
Singapore started, we had a vision of working towards being a garden city, right? And then became city in a garden. Now our latest vision is towards a city in nature. So greenery has been a very kind of integral part of our planning story. And over the years, I think we have also worked on different levels of design strategies on the ground, even roadside planting. It is something that the different agencies like National Parks Board put in a great deal of effort to, basically line the roads with beautiful trees. For development parcel, that's where the work of URA comes in. We drop guidelines, either through development control guidelines or urban design guidelines to guide the developments to provide additional row of building setback with additional row of trees and so forth. We also have policies to encourage a developer and architect to design privately owned public spaces within their development. So this is on the ground. As the building gets higher, we also have this policy called LUSH. Basically, is to guide developer and architect to replace their amount of site area that they displaced, right, because they are building the project, and to have it replaced in different forms. It could be balconies, sky terraces, planted boxes, vertical green, and so forth. And by doing so, this additional greenery or largely landscape public spaces become additional elevated public space for everybody to enjoy. Of course, while we give this as a kind of incentive, meaning we don't count them as chargeable floor area or commercial floor area, but the condition is that they have to keep it publicly accessible such that everybody in the city can come out and enjoy these accessible public spaces.
I wonder too how Singapore manages to keep hold of some of its heritage buildings and the styles, the public housing, the hawker centres, structures where you can live and work and play and eat all in one space. How does Singapore hold on to those things that make it Singapore?
So fortunately for us, while we don't have that much space, it means that we are also need to plan everything in a very efficient manner. So hence looking at transportation, pedestrian connectivity, how far should they walk to the next hawker center? All this become part of the kind of tools and provision that we looked at as we plan each neighborhood. So with all this in mind, the design thinking is to also use some of these evidence-based design tools to really help us look at the distribution, where they should be. And after we do the kind of general planning, we then go down to the details. How accessible these places are? Is there a level difference between the roads and the building? How do we make it seamlessly for someone on a wheelchair or someone pushing a pram to be able to walk in the city in a comfortable manner? So these are all the kind of different levels of design review, should we say, that we have with architects. And hopefully in due time, every single project will kind of able to, like a jigsaw puzzle, plugged in and contribute, there are different range of amenities to offer to the local community.
And you touched on it a bit there about people with different mobility needs. You talked about the ageing population. That's a lesson that certainly a lot of cities will need to start thinking about. Singapore's already started thinking about it. What are some of those lessons that Singapore can pass on to cities about to deal with that same issue?
Yes, I think we do recognize that mobility is important. So having public transport is key, making sure the amenities are accessible. Every parks and open space is planned within less than 10 minutes walk, from their homes. Likewise for public transport stations. And through all these different measures, we hope we really create a kind of more friendlier environment for the aging population. And it's not just about transport, it's also about the environment. The amount of greenery, having playgrounds, senior care centers next to childcare centers, right? So you have kind of promote this intergenerational interactions. Polyclinics, either within walking distance, or we do have some projects where we call the integrated hub, where every of these amenities are in a way co-located within the same plot. Some might even have residential projects like Kampong Admiralty by Woha Architect. It's a fantastic example of how that can, in a way, integrate all the different users all under one roof, complete with public space and roof terrace. So it is a good project to demonstrate how some of these planning and design strategies all come into play.
Back in Europe, I checked in on how Greece was dealing with density with the founder of PILA Studio, Ilias Papageorgiou. Ilias was here presenting Piraeus Tower, a retrofit project that has been awarded the 2024 CTBUH Facade of Excellence Award. Ilias told me more about this exciting new project.
We actually did the retrofit and the new facade of the tower. This particular building has a very fascinating story. It was built in the 70s. They put on a facade in 1983, but since then this building has never been occupied. So it's been, let's say, an abandoned structure for about 50 years. Now, following, let's say, a new energy in the economy and a renewed interest around Piraeus, consortium of developers and investors are transforming the building into an office mixed-use building. And we were commissioned to do the new facade, and we designed some of the common spaces inside, as well as some interior spaces for some of the tenants of the building.
And the facade, how have you made sure that that works with the environment that it's in? How have you kind of kept the spirit of the surrounding area? How have you made sure it blends in with its environment but also stands out as an amazing piece of design?
One thing I should maybe highlight and add here is that, and you've probably been to Greece and you have seen that we don't have a lot of high-rise structures. So that was a very special case during the 70s, actually during a dictatorship. Few high-rise buildings were allowed and were built. One of them was Piraeus Tower, which is actually the second tallest structure in Greece. So that said, it's a structure that is very different from anything around it. Just by its mere scale, it's quite different than the context around. So one of the things we tried to do when we started designing the new facade was how to actually integrate the structure with the context. And we tried to do that by creating a facade that would break down the volume of the building. We tried to give it a sense of movement on the facade. And we also broke down the surface of the building by using smaller modules. These modules are basically a shading structure that really contribute to the energy performance of the building. In Greece, we have a very hot climate, so the most important thing when you design a building is how to shade the glass, and a glass tower is definitely not something ideal for this type of climate. So we very carefully calculated all the sun angles and designed this shading structure, this louver system, to optimize shading, and we ended up having about 21% of energy savings in the cooling of the building.
Do you think this project, emphasis on these types of projects, is that starting to change in Greece? Do you think it's showing a pattern towards maybe further densification by way of tall buildings? Do you think this is the start of some sort of new energy in Greece?
I think so. Certainly with the Ellinikon development at the Athens Riviera, where there are going to be few high-rises there. There is a special, let's say, master plan that allows for that. And the rejuvenation of Piraeus Tower. I think the city and the country is maybe now getting more mature to adapt and accept this type of structures. Obviously, we have to be conscious. We have a historical center, we have important monuments, and I think that's a part of the argument of not having, let's say, high-rise buildings in Athens. But all of these other areas which are on the periphery, let's say, of the downtown areas, which are actually currently being developed as important business centers. One of them is in Marousi, which is on the northern part of Athens. I don't see any reason to continue building 5 4-story buildings instead of having a more organized plan, allowing for high-rise buildings, and at the same time allow for more maybe open space on the ground floor, which is something extremely important currently for Athens. We lack a lot of open spaces, and we also lack a lot of green spaces, which are very important also to mitigate the heat, which is becoming increasingly one of the most important issues in the city.
Speaking of the climate and heat, are there lessons that you think Athens and Greece can teach the rest of the world on how to densify in a hot climate, or maybe that they can learn from other cities around the world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to learn and improve our urban environment in terms of mitigating the heat. And certainly, I think densifying and high-rise architecture can contribute to that. This morning, I was following the plenary session at CTBUH, and a very important thing, I believe it came from Toronto, was not particularly hot city, but still the fact that, for example, high-rise buildings can contribute to the shading of the ground. That's something quite important. So if we design properly and think at an urban level how to position strategically high-rise structures, could have a benefit for the urban environment and the experience of the city itself. And obviously, there are a lot of interesting developments happening in the Middle East, which the climate, I'm not sure if it's similar, but it's definitely very hot. And I think certainly there's maybe a different culture of public space and life on the public space there. But I do see very interesting technologies taking place in terms of cooling public spaces, using wind in combination with high-rise structures to create a much more comfortable atmosphere and experience at the ground level.
So it appears the industry is at a crossroads to new or renew, but rather than feel the need to pick a side, the CTBUH would suggest taking a two-track approach. Fast-growing cities have to build new in order to densify, and existing urban environments have to consider adaptive reuse and revitalisation in order to continue to provide for their citizens. The key is how we can tread both paths in a sustainable and effective way.
The future is dense, and it's going to be more dense, denser and denser and denser. So the answer of verticality, shaped sometimes in tall buildings, other times in more complex type of buildings, is the only one. And the council is just trying to gather all the information. So when we come to that point that people start accepting that is a reality that comes to us, we have the best solutions possible, that people can embrace these tall buildings in a different way, that is a social-oriented solution, that they are affordable, that they're accessible. And there's a lot to do there, and that's the mission of the council, to prepare that future, because again, the future is dense.
For Monocle in London, I'm David Stevens.
Well, thank you very much, David. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. Remember to get your tickets now for Monocle's annual Quality of Life conference, this year touching down in Istanbul from the 10th to the 12th of October. And you can find out more and secure your places at conference.monocle.com. The Urbanist is produced by Carlotta Rebello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.